Hello, and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. Hey Boomer is the podcast where we go beyond the surface, exploring the complexities of family dynamics, maintaining health, navigating caregiving, addressing loneliness and friendships, and embracing new relationships. It's the podcast that acknowledges the challenges and opportunities that come with aging with a compassionate and realistic approach. My guest today, Mary Kay Fleming, is Professor Emerita of Psychology. She's the mother of two, a grandmother of three, and an award-winning humor writer in Greater Cincinnati. For 38 years, Mary Kay taught human development courses at Mount St. Joseph University, and she's held a variety of administrative posts before retiring mid-pandemic in 2020 at the age of 65. The essay that launched her second career as a writer was a humorous essay about wearing Spanx to her daughter's wedding, and it took first place in the Irma Bombeck humor writing competition in 2016. Her most widely read pieces are a satire about readiness for parenthood and an essay on living with a retired husband, published in both Next Avenue and Next Tribe. It was her essay about living with a retired husband that led me to Mary Kay. The story started with, quote, "I was excited about my husband's imminent retirement. I envisioned him cleaning the basement, repainting the house, and cooking dinner while I was at work. Now he's retired, and I realize the odds are better that the whistling forest animals from Snow White will drop by to maintain our home." So you can see where this show's going. I'm going to share the link to Mary Kay's author page at the end of the podcast, and you can read the full article that I just referred to, as well as enjoy all of her other writing. But before I bring her on, I want to tell you about CareLink 360. Aging gracefully with a heart full of happiness and a life filled with companionship is a dream that many of us share. But in a world that often sees aging as synonymous with loneliness, depression, apathy, and anxiety, CareLink 360 is revolutionizing the way we age by offering a holistic approach to senior care. CareLink 360 understands that loneliness can be one of the most challenging aspects of growing older. Their platform connects older adults with family, friends, care teams, and others, creating bonds that will last through their lifetime. To see how CareLink 360 is shaping a brighter future for older adults, go to mycarelink360.com/ref/boomer. And you'll see all of the wonderful benefits that you can get with CareLink 360. And when you're ready to purchase, enter Boomer, all lowercase, at checkout for 5% off your purchase. I also want to mention Road Scholar, and I want to tell you about Road Scholar's great global giveaway. This is amazing. All you have to do is sign up for their free newsletter, and you're entered to win one of 7 learning adventures of a lifetime for 2 people, including airfare on one of 7 continents. How amazing is that? And if you already happen to have a Road Scholar account, you can refer a friend to enter instead. Road Scholar is the not-for-profit leader in educational travel for boomers and beyond, and they have travel opportunities to all 50 states and over 100 countries. You can check out all their travel offerings by going to roadscholar.org/heyboomer. And when you get there, you'll see that pop-up that will give you the opportunity to enter the great global giveaway. Sounds amazing. All right, let me bring Mary Kay on. Hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you are did I say that right? Professor Emerita?
Emerita.
Emerita. I knew
Retired professor. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about how you got into humor writing from being a professor of psychology.
Yeah. Not a direct path, is it?
No.
So I have to give my family a lot of credit. I grew up in a family. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings. We're all spread out in age, and everybody was funny, and everybody was a storyteller. And if I wanted to play with the big dogs, I had to compete. I had to try to one up people when they said something funny. My nearest sibling in age is 4 years older than me, so we are very spread out in age. So there was just a lot of that repartee around the dinner table and that sort of thing at home, and I do have to give them a lot of credit. Probably the first time I made an attempt to write something funny, and I wasn't doing it for publication or anything, but we were, this is probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, we were dog sitting for the golden retriever that lived next door. And
Yeah.
she was very funny, and we had a dog that she played with, and I always thought anthropomorphic humor was very funny. So I wrote these diaries from the dog's point of view. And these people would take about 2 vacations a year. So I was, doing my little diary project twice a year, writing it from the dog's point of view. And the dog dictated to me, and she put in funny pictures and really, juiced it up quite a bit. And, people would say, I want to read your dog diaries. And so that's kind of how it started. And then the biggest change probably came in 2012 when my friend Vicky, I have to shout out to her, she introduced me to the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop. And I went with her, and that changed my life because I found out there were other humor writers, there were places to publish, there were people and groups that I could connect with online, and that made just a huge difference. So the workshop is offered every other year. I skipped the next year and went in 2016 and entered the humor writing contest. And that's when I won with the story about Spanx, which I'm sure every woman has got one of those. My 2 children married within 6 months of one another, so I was getting quite a bit of use out of the,
Oh, goodness.
the
Yeah.
shapewear, as they call it. So, and things just ran from there. I've gone to most of the Irma Bombeck writing workshops and taken courses online and met people online and stayed in touch with groups and critique groups. I was not a trained writer. I was trained as a scientist and an academic, and that's a very different style of writing. So I more or less had to go back to school to learn about personal essay writing. But I love learning new things, so I just took to it like a duck to water. And so now this is sort of my second career, and I really enjoy it.
And it was something that your brother encouraged you to do too, right?
My brother, yes, he probably gave me the best advice I got from anybody about retiring. He and my husband and I, and we're all within 5 years of each other in age, we're sitting around the table, and my brother's pointing to people, what do you want to do when you retire? What do you want to do? And we're all talking about our future retirement plans. And he asked me, and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to write. He said, then start now. That was the best advice I got. And
you
I
knew
did.
right away that you wanted to write.
I did know right away. By that point, I had published a number of pieces, gone to some workshops, taken some classes, and knew that I wanted to spend more time at this. It was always going to be an avocation. It was never going to be a major source of income, but I wanted to freelance, doing personal essays and humor essays, and get into satire a little bit, which I did. And so when he said, start now, the idea was that before you retire, you sort of get moving on what your eventual activity is going to be, so that the transition into that is very smooth. And it was. That was excellent advice. I took it, I used it, and my transition was pretty smooth as a result.
Yeah, that was brilliant advice from your brother to plan to retire to something. So what about your husband? Did he
Yeah.
have something to retire to at that point?
Well, it wasn't cleaning the basement, I can tell you that. I wanted it to be cleaning the basement. I even thought that, see, I did have all these grand plans. I wasn't exaggerating in this story when I said, I wanted him to do all this stuff. I had a
Right.
long list. Well, that wasn't his list. And I put a sign on the basement door: danger, construction zone, pardon our dust. And I thought, oh, he'll think this is funny. It's his new office. He should just go to the basement and not come out until he's prepared to reduce the volume in the basement by at least 1/2. The basement is still full. That was not his plan. But he retired from a career in environmental health and started to write poetry. And I thought, where did this come from? But it was kind of funny, because when he first started to do it, I said, okay, not only are you not cleaning the basement and not doing the stuff on my list, you stole my dream. I said I wanted to retire to write. You didn't say you wanted to retire to write. But he wrote all this poetry, and he's done really good work. It's really good. And I'm glad it's a source of such satisfaction to him. But I didn't know about that plan until he would say, you want to read my poem? So there it was.
That's a cute comment from Jeannie. Oh, if only hints would work. Knock, knock, she says.
You and me both, Jeannie. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
If only.
so how long before you retired did your husband retire?
He retired about 3.5 years earlier than I did. And his retirement was planned. And so was mine, which is great. That's the way to do it, is to plan ahead and do it on your schedule. Not everybody has that luxury.
That's
I wish they did. It makes things a lot easier. But I did wind up retiring 1 year earlier than I planned, because the summer before my last teaching year, 2 people close to me died. My brother-in-law, who was in his 80s, and a friend who was in her 60s. And they died within 3 weeks of one another. And to me, the message of that was, no one gets a guarantee. So if you have something you still want to do with your life, you should do it. And, some people talk about don't die with your song still in your heart. And I felt like I really wanted to take time off to write. And I thought, why am I waiting? So I didn't. Of course, then what happened is I wound up retiring in the middle of the pandemic, which was quite an unceremonious way to leave a long-term job. But who knew? Who knew at the beginning of the school year that was going to happen?
But I love what you said. Don't retire with that song still in your heart, right? Do something that makes you feel fulfilled and happy and meaningful. And yeah.
Well, my humor writing heroes growing up were Irma Bombeck and Dave Barry. That's who I read in the newspaper, and I loved them both.
Too. Yeah.
And Irma Bombeck has a quote that has always been an inspiration to me, and I will not get it right word for word, but it's something like, when I stand before God at the end of my life, I would like to be able to say, I have nothing left. I used all the talent you gave me.
That's right. I used it all up. Yes.
I used it all up. And that was an inspiration to me. I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to say that I used the talents that I had, and that I did some good with them. I would like to think that my humor writing is uplifting to some people, even if it's just to find out they're not alone in what they're going through. And that's not the only thing. There are plenty of other things that I do. but I never imagined humor writing to be my whole legacy. But I think the idea of if you have a gift that's unused, this is your time to explore it and use it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between the way men and women view retirement. So, so when I think about it, I think about, the women in our generation, really, we felt permission, unlike some of our mothers, to work outside of home. And we were breaking the stereotypes in many ways. And yet, while we worked outside of the home, we also still were mothers, some of us, and we volunteered at, in different capacities. But a lot of the men in our generation, bless their hearts, have not made as big a shift in their role model for retirement. Seems to still be their father's retirement. So did you find that in your retirement and your husband's? And if so, how do we adapt or deal with the men in our lives who just want to rest and relax? Well, we still feel like we have a lot to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you put your finger on something very important. The norms changed dramatically for men and women in our generation. I think we were the transitional generation. I think life is different for our daughters and our sons and our in-laws. Men do participate more in children's care and day-to-day care and volunteering in school and clubs and activities and all that sort of thing. So I think the next generation is doing it differently. But you're right, we saw that model. And in so many things in our life, I think in parenting and retiring to and adjusting to retirement and lots of other things, our default mode is more or less to have the expectations that our lives will be like our parents. And we repeat that pattern unless we decide to do otherwise. So I think the men in our generation did have a challenge with women's expectations for all of it, retirement and childcare and every bit of life, the work-life balance, for that to be very different than the men did. And it really took a lot of communication and adjustment on both our parts in order to deal with that. I think women were always used to a lot of multitasking. They could be full-time at work and also feel like they were doing a full-time job parenting. And as you said, volunteering at school and volunteering with activities and clubs and so on. And they were very accustomed to dividing their attention in many different ways. A lot more men in our generation probably drew their primary identity from their work life. And that has implications for the family, but it also has implications from them in terms of their satisfaction and their reason for getting out of bed in the morning during retirement. If all of their identity and their feelings of productivity were coming from the workplace and not from family life or balancing lots of different things at the same time. So I think, you have to communicate about those differences in norms and the different expectations you have about retirement. You want to sit around, I don't want to sit around, or vice versa, whatever it might be. You want to travel, I don't want to travel, whatever the differences might be, and try to work that out and maybe make some joint plans and also figure out when it's fine to make plans by yourself. Not everything has to be done jointly. So if you have more need for going out with friends, that's absolutely fine. I think it's just something to work out with each other. And that means communicating about the different expectations.
I hear a lot of women talk about, their husband's underfoot, like the title of the podcast, the husband's underfoot. They can't get him to get off the couch. He watches Netflix all day, I don't know if that was your reality, but at least for the first couple of months when they're unwinding. But do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, thankfully, the sitting on the couch all day or watching TV all day was not my reality. It was more like, oh, instead of, working in the basement, I'm going to write some poetry today. And I thought, maybe there's a couple of days that you could still be in the basement cleaning up or whatever. I think it just takes talking about it and trying to figure out where the balance is going to be struck, who's going to do what, and what it takes to make you happy. I know, for example, in our relationship, one of the differences that was real was that my husband, I think, wanted to spend a lot more time together. I don't think his friend network was as wide as mine.
Mhm.
And I like more solitude than he does. Well, that was something to talk about. And a balance had to be struck, a compromise had to be struck. I didn't really want to retire to 24/7 husband. As much as
Right.
I love him, that wasn't my idea of retirement. So it's a matter of working it out with your partner and figuring out ways that both of you can be happy. But if you keep that inside and you let it fester, the difference in expectations is going to continue to be a source of disgruntlement. And it's not good to let it fester. You've got to talk about what those differences are. They can't read our minds. We can't read their minds.
This is true.
So
And I would suspect, Mary Kay, that you used some humor in some of those
yes,
negotiations.
yes. And thankfully, my husband has a wonderful sense of humor.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
people asked me after I wrote the article, they said, "Oh my gosh." And there were several others that feature him in an under the bus position. And people have asked me about that, like, "Oh, how does Don feel about the fact that you write these things or whatever?" And he gets a little ribbing from his friends. He loves it. He eats it up.
He does.
So that's why it works. I would never publish something that really made fun of another person and, got the laughs at their expense. Don thinks it's hilarious that I write this stuff and he's goes right along with it. So that's another thing where, what does the other person expect? What do they have a sense of humor about? What do they tolerate? What do they find acceptable? Works
So
both ways.
it does work both ways.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you're right. You would never have written anything that
No,
made fun of
no,
him because he's your
no.
husband.
No, and I
Um,
never would about my kids either. I think there are humor writers that don't quite draw that line in the same place, but I would never do that.
so has that speaking of kids, has retirement changed your relationship with your kids at all in any ways?
Well, um, yes, in a couple ways. First of all, they're very proud of my writing. They think this is just great because I think to them it came out of the blue, like, who knew mom was a writer? Um,
She
and
was an
so,
academic. Mom wasn't a humorist.
yeah, where did all this come from? Well, I've been saving it up. Um, so there's that. But the other thing is, my children did not have families of their own, children of their own, at the time I retired. That quickly changed. There were two
Mm.
two grandbabies came in 2021, and, and now there's a third, and, that is actually one of the major adjustments that Don and I have made in retirement is that now we babysit 2 of those kids who happen to live right next door. They knew what they were doing when they bought that house.
I guess they did.
Yes, they did. And, we babysit 3 days a week. That's a big commitment. It's a lot of time, but we love it, and it's a joint venture, a joint enterprise, and we have the same goals for that activity. And so I think that's been something that has really brought us together because when I talked about, my greater need for solitude and we don't share every hobby either. My husband is an avid gardener. I don't garden. So, there were some differences there, but this is something we do together and we do have to work toward the same goal. It's the same as when you're parenting and you realize that if you don't get on board with each other's parenting style, the kids will learn to play one
Mhm,
against another, which is
mhm.
not healthy for anybody. Honestly, the same thing happens when you spend lots and lots of time with your grandkids. So that has been something we could do and enjoy together, and we do. We do.
So it's fulfilling his need of wanting to spend more time with you too, and
Mhm.
he gets to be a more participatory parent, grandparent than he probably was when your children were young.
That's right, because he's doing the hands-on care of infants and toddlers, which largely he missed out on his, 5 days a week when he was working. Yeah,
Yeah.
and he was a very involved dad, but he wasn't there as often as I was. So, but he does it all now.
He
Yeah.
does. Oh, good. Good
Oh,
for
yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Yes. So has that changed your relationship with your husband, the retirement, that you're seeing him in a different light now?
I think so because not only did I not see him in this role as often when we were parents, I was like other parents. At the time you're raising your kids, I think your attention is divided so many different ways. In fact, I'm writing a serious essay about this now. Your attention is divided so many different ways. You might be feeding a baby, but you're also thinking about the sink full of dishes and the laundry timer is about to go off and you have to prepare something for work tomorrow. And there are all kinds of other things that are going on. And now, for the 3 days a week, we just eat up our grandkids.
Mm.
And there's not as much division of attention that I think compromised a little bit of what we were able to enjoy and learn from parenting. So it's a lot of fun, and I find it a very mindful activity.
Hmm.
And I think I'm happy I can give it a different level of attention than I was sometimes able to give my kids.
Well, I think that's true. That's one of the benefits of being a grandparent as
Yeah,
opposed to a parent. You're yeah. I mean, I
yeah,
imagine still as you're full-time grandparenting
yes.
3 days a week, you still have to,
Oh,
set more boundaries than if you were
yeah.
just
Oh,
playtime
yeah,
grandparenting.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And that's an important distinction, right? Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So, I'm curious, like, the Monday morning that you woke up and realized you weren't going back to teaching, do
Mhm.
you remember what that was like?
I remember thanking the the brother-in-law and friend who passed away for sending me a message I could use
Mm,
about their passing, and that they sent me a lesson I could learn from that.
hmm,
They both had wonderful lives, and but I think this idea that especially the friend who died in her 60s, that there are no guarantees. We're not guaranteed the amount of longevity we might want. And actually, I learned that in my own family. Both of my parents died when they were 64 years old.
mm,
I grew up thinking people drop dead when they're 64.
mm,
They don't, thank goodness. And I didn't, thank goodness. But that became my internal standard, my expectation. And so seeing older relatives go past that milestone and enjoy more longevity, I did learn some things about living a full life, even after retirement, and that even given that, anything can change in a moment. So if you have something that you still want to do with your life and you have the flexibility to stop working and pursue the other goal, go for it. And I did. And I loved my job while
mhm.
I had it. But I have to say, it's really surprised me that leaving it was like flipping a switch. I did not look back. I didn't long for it. I didn't regret having made a decision too quickly. They invited me back to do adjunct teaching, and I said, thank you so much, but no, um, just no regrets. And that's pretty much how I felt the whole way through. I will say I made the decision to retire in August. The school year started in August. I did wait until December to tell my department about it. I wanted to give them plenty of time to plan, but I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to change my mind. And I was really never tempted to change my mind. So that worked out really well.
You just described the transition so beautifully of kind of finding what's your reason, what's your purpose, finding that spark that really kind of ignites you. And that sounds like what you found now. So when someone asks you, Mary Kay, if you meet them for the first time, what do you do? What's your answer?
Well, I say I'm a grandparent, first of all.
Okay.
And a writer, secondly.
Okay.
And a retired psychologist. I think if I had any hesitation about retiring, it was that I might feel like I lost that part of my identity. I didn't. And I found that out pretty quickly, but that was probably the one question I had in my mind. I wouldn't really even call it a doubt, but a question is, I did have a strong professional identity, and I thought maybe I would lose that entirely, and now who would I be? And I did not feel that way because I realized being a psychologist is the way I look at the world now. And so I'm not going to stop being a psychologist. I'm going to stop teaching psychology, but I'm not going to stop being a psychologist. That was a great comfort.
What about your husband? Did he have trouble transitioning from the role of who he had been professionally?
I don't think he had any difficulty at all either. He had planned to retire. He was ready. He had also loved his job, but he was ready to leave it. There comes a time when you feel like maybe it's time for younger people to pick up the mantle, whether you were in a leadership position or not. It's time to invest in that next generation of people who will take it forward. And I think we both sensed that. And I think he probably had a little bit more of a transition with figuring out what he was going to do with his retirement, because poetry wasn't going to be a full-time avocation for him. But luckily, his brother was volunteering at the zoo. We have a wonderful botanical gardens with our zoo in Cincinnati, and he volunteered on the horticulture team. And Don also loved gardening, so he volunteered along with his brother at the Cincinnati Zoo. So now what they do is, at least this is what Don does, he goes to the zoo one day a week to pick weeds at the zoo, and then he comes home and I'll say, we have weeds in our front yard. And he'll just laugh, and that's the end of it. And the weeds are still there. But he loves picking weeds at the zoo.
At the zoo.
But they have beautiful garden, and they also plant tulips and do all this other stuff. I mean, they've won awards. Their botanical gardens is gorgeous. But so he picks weeds at the zoo.
Wow, you got to have something to do to get out of bed for in the morning.
That's it. You have to find your reason to get out of bed in the morning. There has to be something meaningful. I have a hard time believing that anybody is really happy in retirement sitting in a chair doing nothing.
Yeah.
I do.
I would agree.
Where are you getting your sense of satisfaction? So
yeah,
that's at least what works for us.
So did you ever get him to cook a meal for you while you were still working?
A few times. Don't ask me how many hands I would have to use to count on, because it wouldn't be very many, but yes. Occasionally, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
And so now, what's next for you? The kids are going to get bigger.
They
start going to school.
Yes. The 2.5-year-old already does 2 mornings a week at preschool. And that is a lot of fun, because I can't wait for her to tell the stories my kids told when they were 3 and a little bit older, but they were 3 and went to preschool and learned all sorts of things. And she does come home with stories. but it's been a little bit of a transition from, having her full days to having her just half a day. But the other one that we watch is 10 months old.
It'll be a while.
And so she's pretty much, full-time hands-on. So yeah, there will be those transitions, and we're just going to roll with it. And I'm still going to write in my spare time. I have noticed, I'm not sure if this is temporary or not. I'll see.
Okay.
But I have noticed I do more serious writing now and a little less humor writing. I still love humor, and when something inspires me, I write it. But some of my inspiration came from interactions that I no longer have. For example, I wrote one essay about why I should retire because when I was teaching full time, all the students would come during exam week and say their grandmothers died and they couldn't take the exam. And I started to think maybe we as faculty need to get out of the picture here because all these dead nanas are on our heads. We're apparently killing all the grandparents. Some of these parents, a lot of these grandparents did die multiple times too.
Multiple times, of course, yeah.
It was a terrible fate for them. Yes, they died many times. Often quite gruesome, always during exam week. Always during the exam week. So, and I wrote something funny about going to doctor visits that were embarrassing, mammograms and colonoscopies. And I wrote something that actually did quite well about colonoscopy prep because, and
I
that
remember
was,
reading that one.
well, and people who've had colonoscopies will read it and recognize and hopefully laugh about it. But I had another motive. My mother died of colon cancer. And I thought if everybody can just laugh about the prep and laugh about the procedure, maybe they'll be more willing to go. That's a win in my book. Everybody should be doing routine screening. And if the way we get to encourage you is to make some jokes about, how miserable the prep is and how nothing the procedure is, good. Go. You should go. It's preventable.
Yeah, so your writing really has
Yeah.
a undertone of trying to be helpful, even with its humor, and even as you're doing the serious writing too, I think, right?
Yes, the serious writing comes more from, or is inspired more by stories that I somehow want to get off my heart. There's something that I think might contain, I hope, might contain a lesson for somebody else. And I love that kind of writing. But I have the luxury, I'm not making a living at this. I have the luxury of writing when and what I am inspired to write. And thank God for that. It's a great source of satisfaction.
I love your writing. So we're going to share your author page in a moment. But tell me, we called this Husband Underfoot, Surviving Your Husband's Retirement. Give me 2 or 3 takeaways that would help somebody survive their husband's retirement or their own.
So I think the takeaways are plan your retirement. If you possibly can, leave on your own terms and decide what you want to do. It might be travel. It might be volunteering. I hope it will be volunteering. It might be continuing your education. It might be taking care of the grandkids. But to ease the transition, plan it and do it on your timeline if you possibly can. And then I would say give yourself the time and the space and the grace, and give each other the grace to make the adjustment. It won't be automatic. Everybody goes through an initial period where they think they're on vacation. Hey, this is great. I don't have to, no alarm clock. I don't have to wake up in the morning. And then maybe feeling some loss or some grieving, whether it's for the friends you had at work, the type of work you did, the identity that you might feel a loss of because you're not there, whatever it might be. And then you move into more of a period of exploring. I can do this, that, and the other. I'm going to make some plans about what I want to do in my retirement. But you have to give yourself the space and the grace to do that. Don't expect that what your retirement looks like 2 years out is going to be the same as what it looks like 2 weeks out. And then finally, I would say, don't rely on your spouse or any one person to meet all your needs.
Mhm.
Keep your friend network close. And I think that's especially important for women because on average, women outlive men. And we're going to rely on our friends. So invest in the relationships that you want to keep.
Those are perfect, spot on. I love it. And, I think I mentioned to you, I use William Bridges' book Transitions with some of the coaching work I do. And he talks about exactly those kinds of give yourself some time, give yourself some grace, explore, and friends, so important. Thank
Yes,
you. Thank you so
absolutely.
much.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So Mary Kay's author page is at Authory. It's AUTHORY.com/Mary Kay Fleming. And I will put all of this in the show notes. She also graciously shared her email. This is her email at the university. So it's mary.k.fleming@msj.edu. So you can read her writings at the Authory site. You can email her with questions. I love that we got so many great comments. People really have enjoyed this discussion today. You're beautiful. I really, really appreciate that you joined us today. And I hope that anybody who listens later to the podcast or listens to the recording later will also leave us some comments and kudos and let us know how much that you enjoyed it and what some of your takeaways might be. That would be great.
Great.
Reminder about my carelink360.com/ref/boomer. Go check out how you can help your loved ones stay connected to their family, friends, doctors, caregivers, whoever, in a way that's really easy for them to use. Plus, it has all other kinds of things like brain games and articles and music and things like that. So check it out, mycarelink360.com/ref/boomer, and go sign up for the great global giveaway at roadscholar.org/heyboomer. I mean, imagine if you won one of those 7 trips. That would be so exciting. I signed up. So next week is my turn for a solo show. And I think what I'm going to talk about next week is the book, The 4 Agreements. If you haven't read it, it's by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it's something that we've been talking about in the Boomer Banter group that I meet with monthly. And there's some really important discussion questions in the book. And what he says are really the 4 things that we need to live a peaceful, useful, healthy life. And if you have questions for me that you'd like me to address on one of my solo episodes, go ahead and drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. I'd love to do an Ask Me Anything episode. So whatever your questions might be, not that I would answer every single question, but there might be some good ones for an episode. And each episode of Hey Boomer is an invitation to listen, learn, and apply the wisdom gained from each episode to your own life. The path ahead may not always be easy, but it's traveled best with support and shared insights. Hey Boomer is produced by me, Wendy Green, and the music you heard at the beginning was written and performed by Griffin Honrado, a student at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and my grandson. Isn't that
Wow.
nice?
That's wonderful.
I love that. Thank you so much, Mary Kay. This has really been fun.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay.